Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. In fact, I was thinking about things this morning before we started, and I realized that it was 5 years ago, around this time, when we actually started working with AmCham Croatia. 5 years ago, it also marked my first visit to Zagreb. So hopefully I'll be back there soon, someday in person. But again, today we have a great program. After me, you're going to hear from Amy Lorenzen, who's the consul at the U.S. Embassy in Zagreb, Croatia. And then we have a great kind of, I guess you could say, case study from a company that has successfully brought their business to the U.S. market. We have Josip Bišon, who's the managing partner at Infinem, and we'll be hearing from him later. But before we go on, I just wanted to take some time to tell you all a little bit more about the Launchpad USA program. Again, this is a program that is available to Croatian companies that are members of AmCham Croatia. In addition to telling you more about Launchpad USA, I'm going to just share with you 5 kind of tips that I like to share with companies that are thinking about going to the US market. So let me share my screen here with you. And if somebody could indicate that you can see my slides, that would be great. So again, the Launchpad USA program, it's a program that is designed to support the success of member companies breaking into or seeking growth in the US market. Some look at it really as a market entry platform. And there are 3 main components to the program. One is our market entry specialists. What we want to do is we really want to understand what it means when a company says that they want to go to the US market. In my 7 years of working with over 100 companies, I've learned that that means a lot of different things to many companies. So once we define what the objectives are for your US market entry, we'll then work with you and develop a really tailored step-by-step plan that you can take into action, and that will get you into the US market. The second is targeted networking. We have a great network of people and companies in the US that are ready to assist you as you go through the steps of entering and scaling your business in the US market. These are trusted partners who we have a lot of operating experience with, so we trust them when we introduce your business to them that they're going to provide great services, whether they're legal, financial management, human resource management, banking, the list goes on. And then finally, the events to develop your critical skills and knowledge. There are a lot of things that will change over the course of time while you're doing business in the US, whether they're related to laws or regulations or just simple shifts in the business culture. And so we want to have regular discussions where we bring these changes to your attention and discuss how they impact your business in the US. So those are the real 3 main components to the Launchpad USA. And again, what I want to do is just take a few minutes and go through kind of 5 key tips that we often, suggest to companies to consider when going to the US market. First is taking ownership of your business development activities. It's often tempting for foreign companies to outsource that responsibility to either an independent contractor, maybe somebody they know already in the US. Perhaps it's a sales agency. We really emphasize that the company should send over a key executive, or maybe if it's an early stage company, one of the founders, to go and to start to develop the market for your business. This will, it'll establish credibility within the market for your business. 2, in our experiences, when you send a key person over, they're able to make more on-the-spot decisions. It's not adding an additional layer of communications back to your headquarters. It's a positive thing to do, and it's something the successful companies we've worked with who have come back and said that companies have to do the same as us. They got to send people over on their own. They got to go through the grinds and the challenges of establishing their U.S. business. I think Josip's going to talk a little bit about that later and some of the challenges they've faced, but how they overcame them. Second is segmentation is important. U.S. market is very large. It's very diverse. There's a lot of opportunities. And so if you're coming from a relatively small market like in Finland or in Croatia, it's tempting to just try to maybe sell to whoever will buy your product or service. So we emphasize segmenting the market, maybe looking at certain geographies to focus on. It might be certain industries, it might even be certain company sizes. General rule is that it's easier to sell into small or medium-sized companies than it is to go after the very large companies. So segmenting the market, again, based on geography, industry, company size, or a combination of all those or parts of those, is really a good first thing to do when looking at tackling the US market. It'll help you focus your resources a little better, and it'll get you closer to having those meetings and discussions with your customers. Also, it'll help you better understand what the needs of the market are, and also what the competitive forces are that you're going to be going up against. So again, segmentation is important. 3, scale smartly. In my experiences, some companies might get a little ahead of themselves. They think that there's an opportunity to do business in the US, so they rush out to, set up a US subsidiary, and they're kind of putting, as we would say, the cart before the horse. There are ways that you can start to test the market, and Amy will talk about how you can use different visas, and then hopefully the Visa Waiver Program, or ESTA, to enter the U.S. market. But we recommend, again, sending a key person over to the U.S. market to meet customers, whether at trade shows or direct meetings, establish relationships, get companies to pay for your product or service. Cases, the companies that you're selling your product or service to may require you to establish a U.S. subsidiary, and that's quite normal. And if that's the case, it's quite easy to do those things, to incorporate a business in the U.S., acquire the insurances that you need. That can be done relatively quickly and easily. And so we recommend that you only undertake those actions when you actually know that you do have paying customers waiting for you in the U.S. So moving on to the 4th point, location. U.S. is, again, a very large market. When you look at the continental United States, it covers 3 time zones. So when you're thinking about location, there's a few things to consider. Obviously, proximity to your customers, depending on the type of support or interaction you might need. You want to look at how accessible you are, how close you are to those customers, how easily you can reach them through either road or rail transportation, or maybe air. The other thing to think about too is the need for connectivity to your headquarters back in Croatia. You're looking at a 6-hour time difference from the East Coast US to Croatia, and then 9 hours to the West. So in my experiences, companies that set up a presence on the West Coast of the US, and then they have their headquarters back in Croatia, there's going to be some challenges in maintaining efficient and consistent communication. And I think Josip is going to talk to that point a little later as well. I think that's one of the challenges that they've faced. The other things to think about are, what are your hiring or labor needs for your U.S. presence? There are large disparities in cost of doing business in the U.S. from region to region or city to city. So you want to think about, again, what are the jobs you're going to be hiring for, and what are those costs, and can you really, feasibly support those? So those are some of the things to think about. Oftentimes, companies are often lured to either the West Coast, like Silicon Valley, or to the East Coast, to a place like New York City. But there are a lot of large markets between the coasts, as we say. For example, if you're in consumer products or logistics, a place like Ohio or Kentucky, Tennessee, kind of that that middle part of the U.S. is a very attractive place to set up your business. We're working with companies right now that are looking at places like Indiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, just because it makes sense for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned just a minute or two ago. The 5th point is be willing to invest in talent. One of the, as I started off, I was talking about how important it is for you, the business executive or the owner, to go and develop the market yourself. Once you've done that and you've successfully done so, and you have customers for your business over there, one of the first things that we recommend is to hire a local person, somebody who has relevant experience, preferably in your industry, somebody who's maybe a little senior, who will give some added credibility to your business. And I think sometimes foreign businesses, there's a bit of sticker shock when they see what the wages those type of people might demand in the U.S. And sometimes there's some pushback and unwillingness to make that investment. I can tell you that companies that have made the investment into hiring good people, they've all come back and said it was probably one of the best investments their business has ever made. So I guess my message here is, don't be afraid, to make those investments. Obviously, do your diligence, make sure that the person that you're investing in or the people you're going to invest in, are who they say they are and will deliver for your business. And just understand that that's what the market might dictate. If you're looking, just to give you some kind of reference points, if you're looking for a business development professional, either a sales and marketing professional with about 5 to 7 years experience, good track record, starting salaries are usually in the $200,000 price range. That's an annual salary. That doesn't include bonus or other incentives. You go to a city like Atlanta, for that same type of profile, the salary is going to be a little lower. It's usually about $125,000, but still quite high, and chances are considerably higher than what you're going to be paying your local employees. So those were the 5 tips that I had. A few updates on the U.S. I won't go too much into this. COVID obviously is still an issue in the U.S. We're just coming off kind of the peaks of the Delta surge. COVID has been a drag on the U.S. economy. Economic growth is still strong, but it's a couple percentage points lower than I think what it should be had there been a kind of a better vaccine acceptance or rollout. Nevertheless, I think the U.S. economy is still growing quite well. It has gone through what we call a V-shaped recovery through the pandemic. A few things to note: labor markets are still tight. Some argue that that's due to government stimulus checks that have been sent out to millions of individuals in the U.S. They just perhaps don't feel like that they need to work so long as they have money coming in. These stimulus measures are being rolled back in some what are called red states or Republican controlled states. They've already cut a lot of these economic support measures. In other states, those measures will be rolled back over time. So we'll see if that brings more people back into the labor markets. But nevertheless, we're seeing tight labor markets. A few trends to take note of. One is that there's a lot of interest and I'd say a strong desire to onshore a lot of the supply chains for critical goods, things like semiconductors, pharmaceutical goods, medical devices, rare earth metals even are being discussed. There's a lot of concern, obviously, with the rise of China, a lot of concern with Taiwan's position and in respect to China. And so you're seeing companies like TSMC, Intel, other chip makers starting to invest in building up large wafer fabs. And I think you're going to see more investment into the onshoring of critical supply chains, but also manufacturing coming to the U.S. So there's some opportunities there. Another thing to mention real quickly before I wrap up is that there's a very large infrastructure bill that is in the House right now up for a vote. It's gone through the Senate. It's a $1.2 trillion spending package that's going to invest heavily in things like new roads and bridges, but also upgrading the rail system, upgrading the water systems in cities, especially in poor, more economically depressed areas. There's some investment into greener technologies, not as much as many would have liked to have seen, but there's investments into building out a nationwide EV charging network, things like that. So again, $1.2 trillion of spending coming probably, in the coming years there. So all in all, the U.S. it's a great place to do business. It consistently ranks very high in the global rankings in terms of ease of doing business. And it's definitely open to foreign companies, foreign entrepreneurs to go there and to make their mark. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and it's my pleasure now to turn things over to Amy Lorenzen, who is the consul at the U.S. Embassy in Zagreb, Croatia. Amy is going to go through all the different types of visas and ways for you to get into the U.S. to do business. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Amy.
As my slide notes, I am consul, not an immigration lawyer. I always make that caveat at the beginning of any presentation, because what I'm giving you is kind of the view from where I sit, but it should not be construed as necessarily immigration advice. If you have serious questions, I think Mike can help you, but also if once you are kind of in that scaling up mode, it might make sense to speak to an immigration lawyer as well. But hopefully this is a good starting point to get you going. So the goal here is kind of, where do you begin? And I, again, appreciate Mike's advice with regard to scaling up, because I'm hoping this presentation does something similar. It starts kind of with the easy ones, and then maybe as your business grows and maybe as you decide you need more of a presence, there are other types of visas that you may want to consider. So the first question you should always ask is, do I even need a visa? And of course, the big elephant in the room is, what's this I hear about ESTA? And ESTA is the program with the visa waiver program. And I know that there's been many discussions. There's been a lot of discussion about this over the last year here in Croatia. There's nothing official that I can announce today, but we are anticipating that Croatia will likely be invited to be part of the visa waiver program. And we are just waiting on official announcements. So I do want to touch on that a little bit today, just because I know that that is something that's always a big question in terms of if you need a B1, B2 visa, or can I go on this ESTA program? So a B1, B2 visa is our most basic visa. It's our business and tourism visa. If you've traveled to the United States, you've likely had this type of a visa, unless you were a student or an exchange fellow. But typically 70% of our visas that we issue are B1, B2 visas worldwide. This visa allows the individual to apply for entry to the United States, and that's always an important point. Simply because you have a visa does not mean that you are automatically granted entry. That is a decision made by the CBP officer, the Border Patrol officer at the border, when you present yourself. So a visa, as I always say, gets you on the plane. It gets you on the plane for you to present yourself for entry. For a B1, B2, you're typically going for a business meeting, you're negotiating contracts, you're meeting with clients, you're attending conferences. It's basically your just interchange of business. And then obviously on the tourism side, you're going for tourism. The duration of stay, that's the amount of time you're given to remain in the United States on a B1, B2 visa, is typically 6 months. So it's a pretty extensive amount of time. Most people don't stay that long. Most people are there for a month, but you do have that flexibility on a visa. Now, again, with ESTA, Croatians cannot use ESTA yet, but again, we hope in the future they will be able to. With ESTA, this is an online application form. You would no longer get a visa, but you would apply online. And with ESTA, you are allowed to enter the United States for 90 days. And it's a little bit more restrictive because you aren't able to change status. But for purposes of our conversation today, I'm not sure that's necessarily a terrible thing. So we'll move on. Another type of visa that could be of interest for this group is a B1 in lieu of H visa. And this is something where if you want to participate into training, if you want to do a contract with a company in the United States, this is a process where you can get a B1 visa without having to get a petition, which you would require for an H visa. It's important to note that you can't receive any salary or remuneration from a US source, so any payment. So let's say you're a contract, somebody's hired you to be a contractor for a specific IT project. As long as you are not being paid directly from that US entity, you may be able to qualify for this type of a visa. And again, the advantage with this type of a visa is that it doesn't require a petition. So it's a lot easier, there's a lot less paperwork, and you're not beholden for someone to approve the petition in order to get the visa. So the B1, B2, the ESTA, and then the B1 in lieu of H, those are kind of the easier ones in terms of paperwork to get. And as you are beginning to look at business in the United States, probably the ones you would be most focused on. These next types of visas are ones that you would be looking at if your business is starting to expand and you want to hire folks as part of that entity. So I'll go through these rather quickly because I'm not sure they're as relevant right now for this group. But we have something called the H-1B visa. This might be somebody who is working for your company. Maybe you've established a company in the United States and you're sending that person over to work for that company, or you've established a partnership with a US company. And again, maybe that US company is paying this individual and this individual will work mainly in the United States. Requires a bachelor's degree. And again, the US employer, so this would be your partner, would maybe file a petition on behalf of the employee. This one is an L1 visa. This is typically for larger businesses. So again, won't spend a lot of time here, but this is where businesses in Europe or outside the United States who have a business in Europe and a business in the United States can transfer employees. So as it says, intercompany transferee. It can be an individual, or for very large companies, they do a blanket petition because they're moving people back and forth all the time. And so for them, it makes more sense. This needs to be somebody who's a high level person in the company. It needs to be the manager, or they need to have some specialized knowledge. They need to have worked for the company for at least a year. And the offices should be up and running shortly after they arrive. There's one other type of visa that I didn't put on the slides, and this is an O1 visa. This is something where, again, if you're deciding that your company has grown in the United States, that you're spending more time in the United States, could be something for the executive part of your company as a way for you to remain in the United States without having issues with regard to being paid and salary and remuneration. So an O1 visa is also an option here. Now moving on to the investor visas. Croatia is fortunate. I've worked in many countries that are not part of this treaty, and so this option is not available. But this is the E1 visa, and then we have the E2 visa. So the E1 visa and the E2 visa are very similar, but one is basically the investor is you're investing in a US company, and the other one is that you are creating a company in the United States. Those are kind of the two main differences between. And I've got some links here in terms of more information, and I can share those with the group after we're done. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing now and see if I can get my camera back on. So I can hopefully folks can see me now. Like I said, I think that the visa issues for the United States can be complex, but for this particular group, I think it makes sense to look at the B1, B2 visas first, and then again, once Croatia, fingers crossed, ascends into the visa waiver program, you can avail yourself of ESTA. And that can also be make your lives much easier in terms of going back and forth between the United States. I'm going to stop there because I do really want to answer questions more than just talking about visas. So hopefully there will be some questions at the end with regard to how this process works. But from that, I'm going to turn the mic over. I'm not sure who is next. Mike, you're next.
Yeah, I think you can turn it back over to me. Thank you very much, Amy, for that presentation. I'm sure there are going to be questions at the end. I have a couple, but we're going to move forward. And if Josip is with us, if he could maybe turn his camera on and microphone. So yeah, it's my pleasure to now welcome Josip Bišan, who's the managing partner at Infinim, which is a Croatian-based company with an amazing roster of clients. I was looking at your website the other day. I mean, you work with some fantastic companies from all around the world, companies like Porsche. I saw Nike on there, and many, many others. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Josip a few days ago about his journey into the U.S. But maybe there might be some people in the audience who aren't familiar with your company. So can you just quickly introduce yourself and your company to us, please?
Yep, sure. Hi, and thank you for inviting me for this event. I'm Josip, and I'm the managing partner at Infinim, one of the four partners in the company. And Infinim is a software design and development company. It was established back in 2005, and from 2010 we've been doing some major expansion, and currently we're at around 300 people with offices all around the world. Most importantly for this topic in the US, but also in London and in some neighboring countries as well.
Great. And so you founded the company in 2005. And when was it again you went to the US, and what were the reasons for wanting to enter the US market for Infinim?
Yeah, so as I said, the company was founded in 2005 while we were still at college. So it was only 2010 when we actually started only doing business, not studying as well. And it was actually 2013 when we decided to enter the US market and establish a company there. And back to your point, I think what you said is definitely true for us as well. We first had some business with the US companies, and that was basically something that triggered us to enter the US market. Basically, the idea behind our entry to the market was that we want to expand our business mainly towards Western, so meaning Western Europe and US markets, basically because the demand for IT services and what we do is much greater there. We wanted to leave some kind of a global footprint, become a multinational company working with other multinational companies. And what's especially important for us is that the entrepreneurial mentality in those Western countries is at a higher level than perhaps the rest of the world. So that was why it was interesting to start there.
Yeah. Okay. And I know I believe it was your CEO went over, and you guys went to the Silicon Valley straight away. So can you share with us, what was that experience like for him, and also, but for your overall team, having somebody in Silicon Valley, and you guys were all back in Zagreb?
Yeah, listening to your 5 points, I kind of realized all the mistakes that we made along the way. When we did it, we initially went for the Silicon Valley. The idea was that it's a center of IT industry. There's a lot of startups. There's a lot of companies that are there and will find our place under the sun and kind of be able to find some clients. And we sent our CEO, Tom, to live and work from there. He actually applied for the O1 visa that allowed him to move there for, I think it was 2 or 3 years of being allowed to be in the US. And it also allowed him to bring his significant other with him. So it made it easier to make the move. What this ended up with was actually doing some 3 or 4 visits lasting 4 to 5 months. And the first one was not as successful because he went on a ton of different meetings and it didn't really pay off. He was just meeting people and getting radio silence from them. But later it started to take off.
Okay. And so when things started to take off, even leading up to that, I mean, what were some of the cultural differences you saw, like from the business culture, in the Silicon Valley in the US versus doing business in Europe or Croatia?
Yeah, I think the most important difference is here I don't know, when you have a meeting with someone, if they aren't interested, they'll let you know explicitly, and you'll know that it's not going to work. Especially with private companies, the owner will immediately like, okay, we don't have the money for it. We don't see that you have all the needed expertise or whatever. But in the US, you'll get to talk to a ton of people. They'll all very much like you. They'll all be very polite, and you'll feel like you've hit it off, that this is going to be a good cooperation. And then you get no return phone calls, you get no returned emails, and you're starting to wonder, why is this happening? What's going on? Why aren't we starting any businesses? Even though the conversations sounded like, yeah, we're going to start in 2 days. So that was the main cultural difference that was a problem for us. And the other one was, it's not actually a cultural difference, but it's more of a problem that we grew up here. We don't know anyone there. And the time needed to build at least some kind of a business network is really a long time compared to someone who's been living there, who went to college, and this is especially important for the US because people tend to go to a different side of the US to go to college and then come back home, or go to an even different state and live there. And then you have a lot of different connections from all around the US where you can start some businesses, some people that you went to college with or something like that, and you have an easier way to get the foot in the door with some established businesses.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up this overly optimistic, I guess, people have in the US, and I've experienced that a lot with entrepreneurs who come back and they're ready to move their whole family over to the US because they said everybody loved what they were doing. And I think that is one of the challenges, like separating just this, I don't want to say phony optimism, but phony optimism versus like real genuine interest. You talk about, the lack of a network. Were there any kind of strategies or tactics you guys deployed to overcome this challenge or to build up your network, or was it just done, kind of the old-fashioned way, just meeting a lot of people?
We decided, there were some communities related to what we do that we started joining and then attending some events, and that's a way to expand the network. But as I said, it's not something that comes overnight. So you need some time. You need to invest some time into networking in order to get something out of it. So what it actually meant is that after Tom was there for the first 4 or 5 months, he came back here and he was devastated. Like, we did no new businesses. None of the prospects turned out to be something that we're going to close, deals that we're going to close. And we were like, okay, perhaps this wasn't the best idea ever. Let's focus on the market here, and let's see if something comes up from the US, we'll pick it up. And actually, it ended up completely the other way around. Probably a week after he came back, calls started to come in. Hey, we talked a couple of months ago. We have a project now. Are you available? Can we meet for lunch or something? And he was like, I just came back. And eventually things started to roll, and we managed to close a couple of deals. And in some time, that kind of brought us a bit of a network of people. So we started working with one person, and that person introduced us to someone else, and that kind of, in that way, we kind of managed to expand our business network over there.
Yeah. So from when Tom arrived in Silicon Valley to when you started closing deals, what was that time frame roughly? Like how are we talking weeks,
I would
months,
say
years?
roughly it took like 6 months from when he went over there to the first
Yeah.
closed business.
First close a bit. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming.
Sorry to interrupt you. I would say even now, so he hasn't been in the US constantly for I think for 2 or 3 years, and even now some context from back then. So it was 2013. Now it's 2021. Some context from back then still contact us now and tell us, hey, we have some business that we're planning. Is it something that you would be up for?
Yeah. Okay. So you had the challenge of getting customers, but then when you got customers, I'm sure there was a new set of challenges. So what were those challenges?
Yeah. So I think as part of getting clients in Silicon Valley, one of the problems was that everything moves blazing fast. So even when they started to ask about doing some business, our lead time would be too long. Even 1 month would be too long. They wanted to start the next day. Startups often lacked proper funding, so you would get someone who started working on a project and then just stops working on it after 2 months because they have no more funding. They don't see it moving any further, and they just decide to shut down a project after spending a bunch of money on it. And that's something that we weren't used to here, because here people would usually have a budget. They would know how much money they want to spend, and they would continue the project. And in Croatia, it's regarded as a failure to fail. While in the US, people would start a project, burn a lot of money, and then start a new project and shut this one down because it didn't work. So this is something that we weren't accustomed to, and it took some time to figure out because people were working on projects, and you also have this problem where people work on something and then it never goes live, and it's kind of depressing to work in that way. So that was also one of the differences. And then again, the other one and the major one was the time difference, because even with software development where you don't really need much face time, you can do everything through emails or some collaboration tools. Even back then, there were some great collaboration tools. But if you do want to do some quality work, if you want to have some impact, you need to have at least 2 or 3, preferably 4 or 5 hours of overlap with the client to be able to discuss things, make some quick decisions, and that kind of stuff. And with the 9 hours difference, it's really a problem because it's not just having to move your time, your work time, so you work until 8 in the evening or something like that. It's also for the other side that they have to wake up at 7 a.m. and then it's the traffic in the LA, in San Francisco, or wherever, where they travel to work for 2 hours and then they need to be there at 7 a.m. to make a phone call with you. So it's definitely a big challenge from the perspective of time difference.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to open it up to everyone's questions here in a couple of minutes. So please start thinking about what your questions are. And as Jelena said, if you have some questions, you're welcome to put those in the chat. But back to you, Josip. So you guys moved away from Silicon Valley. I don't want to say you abandoned it, but you shifted more eastward. So I guess I know the answer, but what was the reasoning behind that? It was obviously to ease the communications, but were there other reasons why you moved your focus from the Silicon Valley, and where did you go?
Yeah, so I think the obvious answer is the time difference, because even getting 3 more hours is something that's really important. But more importantly, I would say is the difference in which type of business you want to work with, and that kind of goes into your one of your points at the beginning, where you said you need to figure out who you're talking to and who are your clients and where to find them. And initially, our idea was, okay, Silicon Valley is the center of IT industry. Everything comes out of there, Facebook, Uber, whatever. So we need to be there. But actually, we're a software development company. We're not a startup. We're not someone who's starting from ground up. So we need some established companies where we can actually provide some service, whether it's digital transformation, whether it's additional services that they can explore, or just updating their current software stack. So what we realized is that, okay, perhaps Silicon Valley and the companies there are not the perfect option for us, and we need a different place where we can have less startups and more of a corporate environment with more established businesses. So we decided to move to New York. And coming to your point, yeah, it's again one of those sexy places, but from the other perspective, it was the only place that kind of made sense to us at the time. We could have moved to some other places, but this was kind of also a center of business on the East Coast.
Yeah. Okay. And I apologize. I don't want to disparage the two places that your business went to. And I think for you guys, it does make a lot of sense where you are. So to kind of wrap things up here, where's Infinium USA? Like, how big are your operations there, and what are your plans over the coming years for your US operations?
Yeah. So currently, so initially when Tom went there, he was the first employee of the company, but as he came back, basically we decided to introduce someone local, basically to overcome the problem of not having the business network and not having people on the spot. And this is basically the biggest challenge that we have at the moment, where a lot of clients are asking or just interested in having an on-site presence. So currently our US office in New York has 2 people. They're focused on business development and project management, but our current plan is actually to expand that office to, let's say, some 10 to 15 people probably, where we would focus mostly on some tech leads and people who can, or designers, and people who can actually meet the client, be there with the client, and solve some of the problems that they have right on the spot, go to meetings and that kind of activities.
Yep. Okay. All right. And one last thing, assuming there's some people in the audience who are thinking about the U.S. market for their business, what words of wisdom or words of inspiration, whatever, however you want to phrase it, what would you like to leave those people with?
Actually, as I was preparing for this event, I kind of put together some bullet points, and then you ended up putting those same things in your lessons learned. So
let's hear from you.
Yeah, I would definitely emphasize spending some time on site. I think this was vital to our understanding of the US mentality and how everything works there. But also investing in local presence is something that's crucial. Having someone there and having someone who's actually been in your industry is really important. Initially, how we approached it was we were looking for a business development person, and we didn't really look into that this person was necessarily doing the same thing that we're doing, offering services, and that was actually our mistake, where we should have went for someone who was actually doing business within the industry that we're doing, so they could immediately start from first day doing some bringing some value to us, rather than learning about the business and learning how to do some things. So yeah, local presence, spending time on site, and definitely learning about your target audience. I think those 3 are kind of the key things.
Great. Thank you so much, Josip. So at this point, we're going to open it up to some questions. So again, you could either put them in the chat, or you can maybe just unmute yourself and ask the question, or raise your hand and we can call on you. I don't know what's customary. I apologize in Croatia. I don't see any questions.
Anyway, whatever is easier. If you don't feel like typing, please just turn on your mic and camera and ask the question, so it's no problem. Yeah, whatever is more convenient. So
okay. So, and then Amy, also maybe if you're able to turn your camera on if people have questions for you. as well. So, any questions from the audience?
You were so good in covering all the details.
I would say that this is one of the cultural differences between Croatia and the US that we actually struggle with. Our developers, our people from Croatia, tend to have calls with our US clients, and then nobody has any questions because they're always afraid of asking the wrong question, asking something that will feel stupid or something like that. And that's something that we're kind of fighting against. So feel free to ask questions.
Okay. And it's the same thing here in Finland. Nobody asks questions. If it's okay, I'm going to ask one of Amy. You mentioned with the L1 visa, you said this is typically used by larger companies. It's not exclusive for larger companies. It can be a smaller company to apply for the L1s. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. That's correct.
Okay.
I think I probably conflated the blanket L1, which are the big companies, and then the individual L1. And those are definitely smaller companies that are moving maybe one person every year or every couple years.
Okay. Yeah. In my experiences, the L1s have been quite popular with these growth companies to move one of the founders over to really ramp up their operations.
Right. And I've also seen O1s, like a company, used in that way as well.
Yeah, okay. I think there was a question, Jelena, in the chat.
Yes, there is a question. It's in Croatian, so I'm guessing it's intended for Josip since it's in Croatian. But it says, kakva su vaša iskustva sa outsourcanjem posla za tvrtke iz SAD-a? So let me try to translate it. It said, what are your experiences with outsourcing for companies from the USA? I hope I translated it correctly. So.
What is the direction you're interested in? Outsourcing to US companies or for, US companies outsourcing to Croatia?
Kakva su vaša iskustva sa outsourcanjem posla za tvrtke iz SAD-a?
Okay. Yeah, so basically all the work we do is pretty much some type of outsourcing, I would say. I mean, all the client work that we do is pretty much outsourcing some IT services to services to our company. So I would say that all the experiences so far have been good. Sometimes I would say companies in the US prefer to have someone local to kind of have a better feeling about the company, because when you're talking to some potential contractor from Croatia or from some other Eastern European countries or even further to the east, it's often hard for them to understand what kind of quality they're going to get, and are there going to be any problems? Do they have any legal issues with exports to those countries and that kind of stuff? So they definitely prefer if there is a local presence that can kind of ensure that if something goes wrong, they have someone to talk to.
Ivane, nadam se da je odgovor koji ste tražili. Pozivam još jednom za daljnja, ako neko ima nekakva bilo kakva pitanja, komentare. Ako slučajno nismo dobro shvatili pitanje, slobodno bacite. Dobar dan, gospodine.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. I have a question for actually both Mike and Amy. It's regarding the non-profit 501c tax exempt. So if that was to be started in United States, what kind of visa is required for that? It's a typical business visa. And on a Mike side, do you have experience with setting up such, non-profit in the USA?
Amy, I could jump in first. Actually, I do have experience setting up a nonprofit. AmCham Finland had an office in New York City years ago that was registered as a New York not-for-profit corporation. I don't know if you have any specific questions related to that, but I mean, I can tell you that the process is very much the same. Like you have to register a business and you have to choose a state to register your business in. You have to choose what type of business. And then the nonprofit kind of tax exemption is something that you have to apply for that business that you register. And you basically have to prove that the actions and the operations are done on a nonprofit basis. And so obviously it requires, and you apply for the nonprofit status to the state in which you are going to basically conduct your operations from. That's very general. I don't know if you have more specific. There's different classifications. There's 501c3s, 501c6s. So one of the first challenges is figuring out what type of nonprofit your business will be in the U.S.
Yeah, it would be more involved with sports, but yes, that's it answers me the question. I mean, you obviously have experience, so if I was to push forward, definitely, I can relate or come back to you with.
Sure. Yes.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you. And as far as visas, Amy.
Yeah, Amy. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the visas. I don't know if it would be the same for any business. Do you have any thoughts or comments, Amy?
You're muted, Amy. Sorry.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
So sorry, I would probably have to look at our regulations just because this is not a question I'm usually asked by a business group. But I do think it's probably you'd start with a B1, B2 regardless, and you would be able to go back and forth on that. And then depending on, like I said, I'd have to look further into the regulations, but I think B1, B2 is a good starting place.
Oh yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Damir. Are there any other questions?
Yes, there is one. I see you reading. Shall I read it or?
If you don't mind,
Sure,
yell.
no problem. So Berislav Šizmek is asking, CBBS is consulting a brokerage company from Zagreb, and we have EU clients, digital and hybrid event platform, looking for raising 1 to 2 million euro capital for global growth. Any tips or source of PE or VC funds to get in touch in the US?
I suppose that I could take that. I don't know if Josip if you guys did anything with VCs, but so in terms of VCs, I would say if you're a Croatian company and you're.
Excuse me, Mike, just to interrupt for a second, not sure if everybody knows. So the question is related to private equity and venture capital funds. So
Yeah, so if I understand it, it's a question related to raising private equity VC money from potentially US investors.
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify for the rest of the audience. I don't know if they're familiar with PE and VCs. Yeah.
So I would say a couple of comments on that. A lot of the US VC firms have set up offices over in Europe in the last few years because there's a lot of exciting things happening here. So I would first look at a European office of a US VC firm. I don't want to name names off the top of my head, but it should be pretty easy to find. Most of those offices, I think, are in London, but nevertheless, a lot of VCs have offices here. If they don't have offices here, the challenge will be to find US VCs that are willing to invest into European companies, absent you having a business in the US. In my experience, is typically just simply setting up a US subsidiary company like a Delaware C Corp and hoping that investors will come into that probably won't be helpful enough because the investors want to invest where the value of the company is, where the IP is held. And so then you would have to then think about doing a whole corporate flip where you're transferring all the real assets and value of the company into the US company for the purposes of receiving the US venture capital money. So it's possible. I know Croatian companies have successfully raised money from US VCs, but that would be kind of how I'd approach it. Again, looking at the US VCs with European offices, starting with them. And then talking to US VCs in the US, seeing if they're allowed to invest in European companies. There's information available online about their funds. They have limited partner agreements, and in those, it'll stipulate geographically where they can and where they cannot invest. So obviously, you don't want to waste time talking to VCs that aren't even able to invest abroad. And if they're not able to, then you have to think about, do you want to, flip your corporation into the US? So I don't know if that's helpful or answers, but hopefully it does.
He says, thanks a lot for the tips. We are in touch with some partners, just wanted to get some additional tips.
Okay.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Please feel free to share.
Any other questions, or I guess I'll leave it up to you, Yelena, when you want to wrap things up.
Well, if we don't have any further questions, so yeah, here I can join Berislav in saying thanks to all the speakers. So thank you, all the speakers who have joined us today. I believe it was very useful session. Thank you for sharing your experiences. If any of the audience has any questions, later on, please, you all have my email address. Feel free to write me an email and I will pass on your questions to the speakers in case something else comes to your mind later on. I'm sure they will be happy to help. Thank you very much once again. Thank you, Mike, Josip, Ms. Lorenzen, for joining us today. It was very useful. I don't see any questions coming in, so I think we can close the session. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.